Max Verstappen sat in front of the Bahrain press corps and called the future of Formula One anti-racing. He said driving the new car wasn't fun. He said these rules don't feel like Formula One. And he reminded everyone that his contract has an exit clause that could make him a free agent by summer. But here's what Verstappen didn't mention. On the day before that press conference, his engineers watched him pioneer a braking technique so aggressive that rival teams scrambled to copy it within 24 hours. He posted the fastest time by half a second. And Red Bull's own powertrain director went on record saying Verstappen's brain gives them a competitive advantage that no other team can match. The four-time champion wants to leave. The four-time champion may also be impossible to beat, and those two things are more connected than you think. Let's start with what he actually said, because the quotes are wild. February 12, 2026. Day 2 of pre-season testing at the Bahrain International Circuit. Verstappen had just completed 136 laps the day before, posted the fastest time by half a second, and then sat down in front of the press looking, by all accounts, completely relaxed. And then he dropped a bomb. To drive, not a lot of fun, to be honest. The right word is management. It feels a bit more like Formula E on steroids. He wasn't done. He kept going, telling reporters that everything the driver does with their inputs has a massive effect on the energy side of things. That for him, this just isn't Formula One. That maybe it would be better to just go drive actual Formula E, because at least that series is honest about what it is. An energy management championship. And when a journalist pointed out that he'd also complained about the ground effect cars back in 2022, Verstappen fired back immediately. Yes, but that was still 10 times better than this. But the comment that really sent shockwaves through the paddock was this one. Once you've already won and achieved everything, then it's not really necessary anymore. There are a lot of other nice things you can do. And this certainly doesn't help to keep going for a very long time. That's a 4-time world champion sitting in the garage of the team paying him £40 million a year, essentially saying you might not stick around. And the craziest part, he has a contract clause that actually lets him do it. But before we get into the escape route Verstappen built for himself, you need to understand just how drastically Formula One is changing in 2026, because this isn't a normal regulation shift. This is the biggest technical overhaul the sport has ever attempted. Everything changes at once: the chassis, the power unit, the aerodynamics, the tyres, the fuel, and the sporting rules. Every single element, rewritten from scratch. Fred Vasseur at Ferrari said it himself. In the last 2005 or 30 years, there has never been a change this big. It's the first time they're doing chassis, engine, and sporting regulations all at the same time. The headline change is what happens under the bodywork. The split between combustion engine power and electric power flips from roughly 80-20 to 50-50. The electric motor, the MGUK, triples in output from 120 kilowatts to 350 kilowatts. That's 469 horsepower coming from the battery alone. But here's the catch. The NGUH, the component that used to harvest energy from the turbocharger exhaust, automatically is gone, completely eliminated, which means all of that electrical energy now has to come from one source. The brakes. Every single joule of electricity has to be harvested by the driver through braking and coasting, and then deployed strategically on the straights. The battery holds about 4 megajoules of energy. At full deployment of 350 kilowatts, that battery drains in roughly 11 seconds. For context, the main straight at Baku takes about 15 seconds at full throttle, which means drivers will literally run out of electrical power before the end of the straight. The battery charges and discharges somewhere between 10 and 15 times every single lap. And then there's the active aerodynamics. DRS is dead. In its place, both the front and rear wings now have movable elements that switch between a high downforce corner mode and a flat straight mode. Unlike DRS, every driver gets it on every lap, no proximity required. But overall downforce is down by 15 to 30% compared to the current cars. Add in the fact that fuel allocation drops from 110 kilograms to around 70 kilograms of fully sustainable fuel, and the cars shrink by 30 kilos, and you start to understand why drivers are freaking out. Lewis Hamilton said that at Barcelona, they were doing 600 meters of lift and coast on a qualifying lap. 600 meters where a driver has to back off the throttle just to keep the battery alive. On a qualifying lap, Hamilton's exact words were, "That's not what racing is about." So Verstappen isn't alone in his frustration, but he is the only one with a contract clause that could actually take him out the door. Now, the exit clause. Because this is where the story gets really interesting. Verstappen signed his current Red Bull deal in March 2022. On paper, it runs through the end of 2028 and is reportedly worth around £40 million per year. It was called the longest-term contract in Formula One history. But buried inside that contract is a mechanism that effectively makes Verstappen a free agent every single summer. The exact numbers have never been officially confirmed, but the most credible reports from Sport Bild, The Race, and Motorsport.com outline 3 progressively tighter triggers. For the 2025 season, Verstappen could leave if he dropped outside the top 3 in the Drivers' Championship by the summer break. For 26, the threshold tightens to outside the top 2, and for 2027, it reportedly tightens again to not leading the championship outright. If any of those clauses fire, Verstappen walks for free. No transfer fee, no negotiation, gone. Without the clause, a buyout would reportedly cost over £100 million. The 2025 clause came dangerously close to activating. Red Bull had an absolute nightmare of a season. Christian Horner was sacked on July 9 and replaced by Laurent Mekies. Helmut Marko retired at the end of the year. Adrian Newey had already left for Aston Martin. The team fell to 3rd in the Constructors' Championship, and Lando Norris won the driver's title by just 2 points over Verstappen in one of the closest championship fights ever. But Verstappen managed to cling to 3rd in the standings through the Belgian Grand Prix sprint weekend in late July, holding a 28-point cushion over 4th place George Russell, with only 25 points available in Hungary. The clause stayed dormant. He was locked in for 2026. However, the 2026 clause is very much alive. If Verstappen drops outside the top 2 by this summer, he's a free man for 2027. And Marko himself acknowledged the logic before he retired. It's clear that we can't tie Max down if the new engine doesn't work. The new engine is a risk. There's also a secondary contract story worth knowing. Back when the deal was signed, Marko personally inserted what became known as the Marko clause, reportedly without Horner's knowledge. It allowed Verstappen to leave if Marko departed Red Bull. This caused chaos during the early 2024 Horner scandal, when Marko's position seemed threatened, but the clause was neutralized through a side letter in late 2024. Marko confirmed it to De Telegraaf. So Verstappen has the mechanism to leave. He has the stated desire to leave. And he's already building a life outside Formula One that would keep him racing at the highest level. He wants to do Le Mans. He said it repeatedly. Le Mans I definitely would like to do. I've been there already. When my dad used to race, and the atmosphere is amazing. Driving through the night, sunrise, I think it's really cool. He's even had conversations with Fernando Alonso about doing it together. He tested an Acura GTP prototype in Las Vegas in late 2024 and made it clear that endurance racing isn't a someday dream, it's an active plan. The Nürburgring 24 Hours is even closer. Verstappen secretly tested at the Nordschleife in May 2025 under the alias Franz Hermann in a Ferrari 296 GT3. By September, he was racing competitively in the NLS series in a Porsche Cayman, and in December 2205, he signed a multi-year Mercedes-AMG GT partnership. At Bahrain, he couldn't resist the comparison. I want to do it. At least you can drive flat out there without looking after my battery. And then there's sim racing. Verstappen has been a member of Team Redline since 2015. He won the virtual Daytona 24 Hours in January 2024, and famously won both the virtual Nürburgring 24 Hours and the real Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix on the same weekend. This isn't a hobby, it's a parallel career. So the exit signs are everywhere. The frustration is real. The alternative racing life is taking shape. Everything points toward a champion who is ready to walk away. But here's where this whole story flips on its head. Because while Verstappen is complaining about energy management being the death of real racing, the people building his car are saying something completely different. They're saying these rules reward exactly one skill above everything else, and Verstappen happens to be better at that skill than anyone else alive. Red Bull Powertrain's director Ben Hodgkinson said it explicitly at the team's livery launch. The real value of Max in this regulation is really going to come in when he gets his hands on it on track. The amount of power from the ERS is such a large part of performance, and it can be deployed in different strategic ways. Max will give us an advantage there, because his ability to process things whilst doing 200 miles an hour is absolutely world-class. Helmut Marko framed it even more bluntly. The driver has to be smart and clever how to use the power from the battery, and there is one driver who can drive fast and think. So that should be an advantage. Even Toto Wolff, the head of a rival team, conceded the point on the Beyond the Grid podcast. He said the strategies under these rules almost add a chess component, that the sim driver generation will be in a good spot, and he named Verstappen specifically. And the Bahrain testing data backed all of it up immediately. On day one, Verstappen pioneered an aggressive downshifting technique that stunned the entire paddock. GPS data showed him dropping to first gear at turn 10, a corner where every other driver was using second gear. By using a higher transmission ratio, he increased the crankshaft RPM under braking. which allowed the MG UK to harvest significantly more kinetic energy. The result was that Verstappen could deploy full electrical power for longer on the straights, consistently hitting higher top speeds than anyone else. He peaked at 338 km/h on the main straight, while barely losing speed before the braking zone. Carlos Sainz admitted Red Bull seemed a clear step ahead on hybrid usage. Multiple teams tried to copy the technique by day 2, but most couldn't match Verstappen's execution because the aggressive downshifts create mechanical stress and rear instability that only a driver with massive spare mental bandwidth can manage simultaneously. Former IndyCar driver James Hinchcliffe issued a warning to the grid. You read all the stuff about what's going to make the real difference behind the wheel in this new reg set, and it's that extra capacity to manage energy. There's nobody on the grid that has more bandwidth in hand than Verstappen. There's a chance he's going to be even higher than everybody. I think the gap's going to grow, and this is the paradox at the heart of this entire story. Verstappen hates that 2026 turns Formula 1 into an energy management championship, but energy management is arguably where he holds the single largest advantage over every other driver on the grid. The regulations he wants to quit over might be the regulations that make him most dominant, so will he actually leave? Look at his psychology. This is a driver who has said since he was a teenager that losing is the worst thing he can imagine. His father Jos raised him to go flat out from the very first lap. Never ease into anything. Never hold back. Verstappen himself has said that a lot of drivers can be very quick, but they're at full capacity to achieve it. The very best, he says, drive just as fast while having extra capacity left over. That extra capacity is exactly what the 2026 rules reward. Lando Norris, the reigning world champion, called his bluff directly. If he wants to retire, he can retire. Formula 1 changes all the time. But I don't expect Max isn't going to give 100%. He is still going to try and win, and Max is never going to not try. And Verstappen himself, in a Viaplay documentary that aired just 2 days before his Formula E on steroids press conference, offered a revealing distinction. Once you have achieved everything that you wanted to achieve in Formula 1, you also have a bit more freedom to look into other things. Freedom, not departure. That word choice matters. He's not saying he's leaving, he's saying he now has the leverage to race on his own terms. To do Le Mans, to race at the Nürburgring, to invest in sim racing, and if Red Bull's car stops being competitive enough to trigger his exit clause, to walk away with zero consequences. But as long as he's fighting for wins, as long as the car gives him a chance to compete at the front, everything we know about Max Verstappen suggests he's not going anywhere. Because the same competitive fire that makes him hate managing a battery is the exact same fire that won't let him watch someone else win a championship from his couch. The 2026 season opens in Melbourne on March 8th, and the driver who says he might quit, he'll be on that grid, trying to win, because that's the only thing Max Verstappen actually knows how to do.